欢迎收看我们专访劳伦斯·斯宾塞3集节目的第1集。斯宾塞先生是作家，是编辑，也是出版商。他出版的书涉猎范围很广，包括西方历史、艺术、神话、灵修、逻辑以及科幻小说各方面。他最著名的作品之一就是《外星人访谈》。促成这本书的真实事件发生在1947年7月，当时在美国新墨西哥罗斯威尔附近，有位农夫发现在他的土地上有很不寻常的残骸，看起来像是坠毁造成的。美国空军派遣军事情报小组去查看那些残骸，并报告调查的经过。对许多人来说，军方关于坠毁事件的报告让人好像在雾里看花。美国军方表示，那只不过是坏掉的气象球所留下的残骸。不过，却有许多人相信，那些碎片其实是幽浮坠毁在地上后的残骸。罗斯威尔牧场发生的事件，真相究竟是什么？数十年来依旧是难解的谜。事件发生的60年后，劳伦斯·斯宾塞收到一个邮寄包裹，寄件人是马蒂尔达·马克埃罗伊，他是一位护士，也是那个军事情报小组的核心组员。他在坠毁现场看到了一切。这起秘密事件发生的数十年后，他打算向世人揭露自己在事件的第一手经历。我们来和劳伦斯·斯宾塞先生聊聊《外星人访谈》这本书的出书经过。他的故事要从90年代末期说起。当时他在偶然的情况下联络上马克埃罗伊女士。
The first book I wrote was the book The Oz Factors. And this is the book that I was researching at the time that I contacted a nurse. Of course, I didn't know that she was a nurse at that time. But the lady who was the editor of this book gave me the phone number for someone she thought might be able to give us some information. So I called the phone number, and a lady answered, and I told her a little bit about the book. And she was very interested, and she said, well, I don't have anything I can tell you about it. And she didn't offer any information about who she was. So that was about a 15-minute conversation on the phone. So she said, well, when your book is finished, send me a copy. So I sent her a copy of the book and totally forgot about it. And it wasn't until almost 10 years later that I received an envelope from her from Ireland. They were original documents and some handwritten notes and some typed notes. She was a surgical nurse for the U.S. Army at the Roswell Army Air Force Base. She served at that base in 1947. So she was there as a medical person, whatever nursing duties she might have had at that time. And everything I know about her is in the book.
马克埃罗伊女士连同文件寄来一封信，她在信里面说，这些文件里涵盖一些问题，人类必须知道这些问题的答案。我们是谁？我们从哪里来？在地球上有什么目的？如果宇宙的其他地方有外星人，他们为什么不和我们联络？斯宾塞先生在2008年出版《外星人访谈》，将这些见解深刻的文件公诸于世。
So you're the editor and published this book, but she has the content comes from Miss McElroy herself.
Yeah, none of the content is from me except the footnotes, which are from various sources. But it's all very self-contained and self-explanatory in as much as it's her material or the material of the U.S. government, she claims. So the only thing that has to do with me is that she sent it to me.
多么引人入胜的故事！我们要花点时间 感谢上帝创造这个令人惊叹的宇宙。罗斯威尔事件访谈，洞察人类的宇宙历史。马上回来，就在无上师电视台。
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
欢迎回到本节目，继续收看我们独家专访劳伦斯·斯宾塞。他编辑并出版了《外星人访谈》这本书。斯宾塞先生告诉我们，马克·埃罗伊女士第一次到罗斯威尔坠毁现场所发现的景象。
What she says in her letters, in notes and so forth, is that at the time of the crash, which was some not too far away from the Roswell Air Force Base, she was asked by the security officer or intelligence officer to go with him to the site of the crash. And she drove to the crash site to give medical assistance in case it were needed. So, of course, she didn't have any idea where she was going. But when they arrived at the site, she said that she witnessed part of the crash and saw 3 other alien bodies, not exactly like, but similar to the pilot of the craft. And when she arrived, she sensed telepathically communication from what turned out to be the pilot of the craft, who was the only one who survived the crash. And as you'll read in the materials in the book, the bodies that died, so to speak, at the crash were more biological in nature than the pilot herself, who was a non-biological entity, and essentially using a body that was adapted specifically to navigating the craft, which is kind of a very interesting story in itself. When you read the book, you realize that the navigation of the craft is handled telepathically through a direct connection between the body and the nervous system, so to speak.
马克·埃罗伊女士亲自访谈过这位名叫埃罗的外星众生，时间持续了6个星期。
The frequency wavelength of the being herself in connection with the craft were kind of one unit. So she discovered this later in the course of the interviews, but when they arrived at the site, of course, none of that was known.
And she was the only one who could telepathically communicate with the alien.
Yeah, they attempted on a number of other occasions to have people, they brought people to the base who they thought might be able to communicate with the alien pilot telepathically, and no one was successful in doing that.
Can you tell us about Errol?
According to the interviews, Errol is a pilot, officer, and engineer of an extraterrestrial or extra-universal, possibly, civilization that the nurse refers to as the domain. She said it could be called the realm or the territory or the home or any number of different euphemisms for the place or the civilization from which the pilot and his companions come from. So during the course of the interview, of course, the pilot explains a lot more about that in detail, and why they were here and what they're interested in. And they're not primarily interested in Earth specifically. It was sort of a landing spot or jumping off spot for them near the asteroid belt and the moon in this solar system, which, because of their the nature of their low gravity station in orbit and so forth, were a convenient place to establish a base of operation and kind of a jumping off point from wherever they came from toward the center of the galaxy and other places.
Miss McElroy transcribes that Errol refers to us as beings as Isbys, meaning immortal spiritual beings.
Essentially, the pilot says, in her opinion, that every sentient being is an immortal spiritual being, regardless of what kind of body they inhabit or not.
Or what planet they came from or not.
Yeah, whether they're situated in the physical universe or not. Obviously, a spiritual entity doesn't have to inhabit a body. But in the case of Earthlings inhabit a biological body, which, to the degree that they're mortal through the inhabitation of or animation of a body, doesn't negate the fact that in the grand scheme of things, we are individually and collectively immortal spiritual entities.
埃罗指出，我们的银河系在数百万年前曾被残酷、集权而独裁的旧帝国统治。这个帝国残暴的统治者指定地球在旧帝国中扮演特别的角色。大约1000年前，有一股慈悲的新统治力量，也就是埃罗所属的统领地，派遣3000士兵的远征部队来到地球，才意外发现地球的角色。
It was discovered accidentally by this domain installation of about 3,000 officers and other personnel of the domain that Earth has been being used as a prison planet for who knows how long time. Certainly hundreds of thousands of years, but more recently and more actively since about 30,000 years ago, I think she says. But at that time, they weren't aware that there were military establishments of the old empire in this solar system. So they were attacked, and the Himalaya base was destroyed, and the domain beings who were part of that force in the Himalayas were captured as spiritual entities and taken off and reinterred or incarcerated in the Earth prison planet system. So consequently, the domain sent several other follow-up missions to the area to try to recover those people, those personnel, who were by that time in biological bodies. So they went all over the world, through the air and under the water and land and so forth, trying to establish the identity of what happened to their officers or where they were. And many attempts were made, which he describes in some detail, to contact and establish communication and extricate those personnel from the biological bodies they were trapped in unsuccessfully. Apparently, according to the pilot, they discovered over a period of time that this planet and the surrounding area, it's not just the planet itself, it's apparently the surrounding area is set up with electronic force screens or something like that, some mechanism that identifies the frequency, the spiritual frequency of each individual being, sort of like your cell phone could identify you by GPS no matter where you are on the planet. There's a unique frequency signature that identifies the location of that phone. Similarly, each individual being emanates a frequency themselves energetically. It's very unique and identifiable to each individual, and really doesn't have anything to do with the body so much. It has to do with the being themselves. So essentially what she says they discovered over a period of time was that this prison system, however it works, no one really knows for sure, but apparently it's set up using very sophisticated technology by the old empire to keep everybody behind this kind of electronic fence or something. And part of that is the wipe out of the memory of the spiritual being before they are brought to Earth, as a spiritual entity and put into a biological body so that they don't remember where they're from or who they are or how they got here or anything about their previous existence. The pilot says that they use billions of volts of electricity to erase the memory of an immortal being, which immortality itself suggests the idea that you've existed forever and will continue to exist forever. So to wipe out that much memory that thoroughly is probably no small feat. So the biological body, according to what the pilot says, is part of that prison system.
埃罗揭露的讯息真是令人惊奇不已。我们要花一点时间去感受天堂的爱。敬请锁定无上师电视台。
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
欢迎继续收看罗斯威尔事件访谈，洞悉人类的宇宙历史第2集的节目。我们继续访问劳伦斯·斯宾塞先生，在他编辑出版的《外星人访谈》这本书中，外星人埃罗叙述了自己的身体和地球上的物质身体是怎么产生的。
For example, the pilot herself isn't using a biological body. She's using what she refers to as a doll body, which is designed specifically for the operation of the spacecraft, or for her role as an officer and an engineer and a pilot. Those kinds of bodies are manufactured. They can be used interchangeably. Some of the bodies have different purposes depending on the role that the person plays, and they can attach tools to them or whatever they want. Not exactly like robots, much more sophisticated than that, but same idea. It's the body is used as a tool. It's not something that you inhabit by choice, except to carry out the functions of your assigned tasks. But the pilot says that the hierarchy of the domain at the higher levels doesn't use bodies at all. In fact, they avoid using bodies because it's easy to get entrapped in a body. But the biological bodies, on the other hand, have been designed over a very, very long period of time specifically as a way of enslaving or entrapping various beings throughout the universe for a very, very, very long time, trillions of years, she says, specifically for that purpose, to kind of keep a segment of the population enslaved and located and identifiable for whatever purposes. One of the most interesting things to me is her description of the character of the population of the Isbys on Earth, which she says she refers to as untouchables, which is obviously a term that's been used in an English translation of a term used in India for a long time, which essentially is anyone who's undesirable, unwanted, and outcast, a low caste, someone to be avoided. So the beings inhabiting biological bodies, in the opinion of the old empire government, or the secret society, essentially what she refers to as the Brotherhood of the Serpent, were, for whatever reason, interested in getting rid of people from their population. Either they're psychopaths, they're perverts, they're criminals, or they're the other end of the spectrum. They're too creative, they're geniuses whose genius and inventiveness is no longer needed in a civilization that's been around for billions and billions of years, wherein everything is already invented. As with any totalitarian government, it has its own definition of what's desirable and what's not, and its own codes. So the people on Earth, for a wide variety of reasons, were sent to Earth to just get rid of them permanently, forever. When you're sent to Earth as a prison, doesn't necessarily indicate that you're a bad person or that you've done anything wrong, or you're just undesirable in the context of that civilization and their judgment. Part of the prison system mechanism is not just amnesia, but this planet itself was chosen because of the very volatile nature of the planet. Volcanoes, tsunamis, hurricanes, polar shifts, the continents are crashing into each other continually. So it's kind of, this planet is kind of a cement mixer of natural elements which make a long-term civilization really not possible. You just can't build a house and expect it's going to be there 10,000 years from now, much less 100,000 or a million years from now, because it's going to be gone. It's going to be under an ocean, or one day it's under the ocean, and 100,000 years later it's at the top of the Himalayas.
感谢劳伦斯·斯宾塞先生分享书中的精彩内容。青海无上师曾多次谈到外星人以及他们如何帮助我们。以下是青海无上师的开示。1995年6月10日，讲于福尔摩沙。福尔摩沙又称为台湾。
Many of the UFO are very friendly, very, very friendly. They just look different. So the Earth people are frightened of them and sometimes do them harm. That's a pity. It should not do that. Should not do that. Should leave them alone. And whenever a UFO crash landed on our Earth, we should help them as much as possible to repair their vehicle and speed them back home as soon as possible. That will do tremendous good to our planet. In time of trouble, these people will come and help us unconditionally. Otherwise, we make enemy for nothing. They are our friends. They're watching the planet just like we have to watch the mountain for landslide, or we have to watch some troubled water somewhere in order to prevent disaster. They're not intending to harm us. Those harmful ones are not from the intelligent life. Those harmful ones are from devils, from Satan. It's different force altogether.
Well, as I recall, the pilot says that they haven't been able to discover exactly the exact nature of the prison system, which is fairly complicated, and the nature of it is vast and multifaceted. It's not just like building a wall. It's a very specific combination of lots and lots of different elements. Amnesia, isolation, memory, not just the memory erasure, but the replacement of actual memory with false memories.
如果地球上所有众生真的都是囚犯，我们有办法脱逃吗？有没有人逃狱成功呢？我们该怎么做才能脱逃？斯宾塞先生接着告诉我们这位外星驾驶的说明。
Pilot said something about Buddha may have been one person who was able to transcend that, the prison planet situation, or Lao Tzu. The pilot refers to Lao Tzu in the context of the history of Earth as a kind of example of a philosopher or a being who may, by their personal mental or spiritual discipline, may have been able to raise themselves above the level of being trapped by a physical universe or biological body.
So studying with the saintly being could be one of the ways that we could potentially free ourselves.
Possibly.
Possibly.
I mean,
but they also,
knows?
in that regard.
Well, the nurse makes a comment in the last letter that's included in the book, is that we're going to have to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and rise above being human, and change our understanding and perception of who we really are as immortal spiritual beings, and really just stop buying the lie that you're a biological body, that you're mortal, that you have limitations, that you're in some artificially created time stream or something. She does say very specifically that what we consider to be science on this planet is not an answer to anything. It's not an answer to any problem. For one, science in the context of Western civilization worships the physical universe, so to speak. It's all about the physical universe, and there is no spiritual being, there is no individual immortality in the context of Western science. It's all materialism. It's all atoms and molecules and bombs and bacteria, and it's all a physical phenomenon which somehow miraculously appeared all by itself from nothing. Because we have to remember that everyone on this planet, including the scientists and the priests and the so-called leaders and the peasants and whatever the population is on this planet, we all share the common reality that we're imprisoned in biological bodies and we all have amnesia.
外星人埃罗揭露的讯息真是令人惊讶。我们先出去一会儿，感谢出现在天空中的繁星，马上回来。欢迎继续收看我们独家专访劳伦斯·斯宾塞先生，进一步了解《外星人访谈》这本书揭露的讯息。斯宾塞先生这本书曾引起高度争议。我们请教斯宾塞先生，他当初收到马克·埃罗伊女士寄来这些与外星人访谈的机密文件，是否曾担心过自己的安危？
But when I received it, I was very skeptical, and because they were represented to me as being essentially stolen top secret government documents, I thought, wow, this is not good. I have a family. So the last thing I want, and she warns me in the letter that she wrote, don't endanger yourself by publishing the material. So I considered that to be a genuine threat or concern. So I didn't tell anybody about any of the material, not even my wife, who to this day, she never saw any of this stuff. I never showed it to anybody for that reason, because of the nurse's warning. So I kept it all to myself, and I studied it very carefully, and I spent a lot of time researching, which became what the footnotes are in the book. It was my attempt to verify, to the best of my ability, that there was some degree of authenticity, factuality. So after many months of doing that, I satisfied myself that, well, it's worth publishing because the information is very revealing and dramatic in the context of Earth. Whether it's true or not, it's very thought-provoking information, to say the least. So I destroyed all the original documents so that I couldn't be attacked subsequently, as she suggests. She said, well, why don't you take all this and write it as part of a science fiction book, so if anybody asks you, you can say, oh, I just made the whole thing up. So I've always represented this book, as I wrote in the disclaimer at the beginning of the book, that this is what it is. I'm just putting it out there as exactly as I received it, without any alteration. I just typed it mechanically, letter for letter, and there it is. Make up your mind.
What is your personal wish for humankind?
Well, obviously, like everyone else, I don't want to remain enslaved in a biological body, going through the cycle of death, life, rebirth, pain, agony, suffering, deprivation, blindness. I mean, the biological body is essentially guarantees that your perception of the physical universe is limited to about 1% of the whole electromagnetic spectrum, which is almost nothing. Both in hearing, sight, any other perception that you have of the physical universe through a biological body virtually disables you completely. There are so many, many more life forms on this body that have a vast ability to perceive things in the physical universe than human biological bodies do. Generally, our inability to perceive and communicate directly as spiritual beings, the way the domain does, apparently, according to the pilot, really puts us in a bad spot for the rest of eternity if we don't figure out some way to transcend this, or if the domain or somebody from the outside who has some sort of benevolent intention comes back and rescues us, so to speak, or dismantles this mechanism by whatever means.
2017年7月23日，青海无上师在福尔摩沙西湖，福尔摩沙又称为台湾，一场开示中提到许多论点，内容与外星人揭露的讯息不谋而合。
Originally, all of you, any of you, all came from very high level of existence. Some of you have had some, other bodies, physical bodies. Some of you don't. It depends on which planet you come from. The reason, the proof that you came from a more highly sophisticated planet and a better quality of life is that you are here. Understand? Because if it's not for that, you will never be able to come here. You are sent here, you're exiled here by high technology and by some soup that you drink before you came. They force you to do it. A long time ago, maybe 1,000 years ago, they put up this kind of, or just say radar system, okay? Because I don't know how to explain this. Some kind of borders, all around the planet. And only the people they want to be here can be here. Even the agents who work for them and all that. Otherwise, no one can come and go. Therefore, we are in prison here. Me, you, okay? Except we can go in and out sometime in our soul. And that is important. It's a horrible system. I hate this. I don't like that. And then they make human crazy out of frustration, because the humans, this race of human, they came from a higher society, they were free thinker people. There are some high-tech inventors, scientists, healers, engineers in their homeland. And then because they make some mistakes, they've been exiled here. And forget everything, forget all the talents they have, forget all the freedom they have, and forget what glory their being was before they came down here. But somehow, in some little remote corner of their mind, they feel something is not right about themselves in this environment, in their own situation. So they feel very frustrated, and that's why nobody is happy on this planet.
地球是一座星际监狱，几乎不可能逃脱。这则来自青海无上师的消息，令人感到沮丧。然而，2017年10月1日，青海无上师在福尔摩沙西湖，福尔摩沙又称为台湾，另一场开示中，却发布了一项重大讯息。
我告诉你们一个好消息，本来我第一次下来就很累，不过很激动，告诉你们了。那个我们那些天上的 强壮的那些神啊，那些小上帝了啊，那些从 EOS 上面啊额外一点了，他们就把那个世界的所有的那个控制的器官全部 smashed，that's what they did， 全部。因为我累了，我不想在那边忍辱了。我说好了，不管怎么样，业障就业障，我是福报就福，我管了，把它全部破掉。还有总今天什么人不好的话，送到别的地方去，送回家。送回自己那个地方了。我重复那个英文的那个消息 ，OK？ 因为我事实上是昨天晚上了啊，我问他们我交代事情有没有弄了，他就说有弄，这样英文就一字而已 ，did， 意思说处理好了，中文就讲那么多话的，我就问 Did you do what I ask？ Did， 这样的，然后我问。因为我怕我不懂，或是他们不懂，我说我问什么东西啊？我就问那 What did you do？ 你说处理好了，你怎么处理？你们怎么处理？他就说 Smashed all the machines， 呀，还有。take care of all the bad ，yeah something like that 啊，这样的 ，OK， 意思说他把全部那些机器啊，你们看不到的，我们看不到，全部 smash， 表示说 smashed， 表示说全部弄打碎就对了，了解吗？打碎了啊，只有他们能够啊，连那个阿修罗神通那些3界以内、5界以下、5界以上没办法，所以啊，我觉得很重要，就是你们不是拍手而已，帮我谢谢那些从 EOS 过去的那些神 ，OK 哈，每天以前啊，要谢谢最高的上帝允许，还有谢谢他们帮我助手，我每天谢谢他们了。不过小事情，今天真的大事情要谢谢，要请大家帮忙我一起谢谢的 ，OK？ 因为这个很大了，就很大，当然不会有马上影响了，不会，最少就是2个月以后了，才觉得那种影响 ，OK？ 那你们打坐会更轻松 ，OK？
开悟的人的话，又会更开悟、更了解、更明确东西。不开悟的人就会慢慢醒过来，就会明白，会更有道德。有一些当然很快就明白了，有一些就比较慢一点。感谢高度进化的观众，今天收看罗斯威尔事件访谈。洞悉人类的宇宙历史节目的最后一集